Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything decide to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John.
And, John, I have looked into the schemes of the future, and I can see that we are currently in the process of making a faction focus for every single faction in Warhammer 40k 10th edition.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty far down the rabbit hole on this one.
You could say that we're seeing far, so to speak.
I dislike that pun. It was a stretch.
How did you never like my puns? They're not puns, they're jokes. They're not sequiturs. But we are doing our best to cover every single faction, and we're now getting into the Xenos, which for me are really fun ones. Like, some people
I do love aliens.
I think aliens are cool. I've played too much Mass Effect, and now I just like aliens.
I do love Mass Effect for lots of reasons.
I'm just assuming you're a degen, and I will ask nothing else. Yeah, we are now in the Xenos section, and I think they're delightful because they're all very unique and flavorful from each other, as opposed to some of the Imperium factions and some of the Chaos factions we've talked about. And the ones we're going to talk about tonight are particularly unique, and I think they're also very 40k in their flavor and design. And that's the Aeldari, or you've probably heard them called the Eldar or Space Elves, colloquially. And that isn't a bad summation. But here on the channel, we really think fluff matters when you're playing games, so we like to really start these faction breakdowns that are supposed to be short and sweet with just a brief pitch of the lore to get a little taster to see if you're into it, so you could dive into it more yourself. And for the Eldar, really the story is about tragedy.
Yeah, very similar to a lot of other like elvish, like folk tales and a lot of other fantasy. It is rooted in a lot of those same archetypes with a twist, and I think it's really good here. I think it's overlooked by the vast majority of the player base and like people interested, because the Imperium is very aesthetically pleasing. The Eldar have a great story.
100% agree. See, the difference between the two largely is that humanity is a young race in terms of a like galactic perspective, but the Eldar are an old race. Not the oldest, but one of the OGs, so to speak. And for most of their existence, they dominated the galaxy through their incredible intellect and their natural psychic resonance. They were able to make technological marvels and innovations that were psychically enhanced, and it allowed their society to reach a state of bliss. No one really had to work. There was no real need to want for anything. You had food and water and shelter and nothing but time to indulge yourself in whatever your passions were. But over time, as happens from time to time in these dark settings, they started to fill their time with more and more extreme acts to try to continue to chase the high, because elves feel things on a deeper level than humans do. So the idea of feeling boredom for eternity hits them hard. And eventually, over time, they became so depraved and so horrible and so lax in their moral sort of cultural vibes that they spawned the chaos god Slanesh.
Yeah.
The god of excess.
And created the Eye of Terror.
Yes, a hole into essentially hell. And when this happened, it just almost 99% of their race died in the blink of an eye. And all of that progress was gone. I got you with that one.
No, your cats got me.
How endearing. And the story of the Eldar really is a story of how these few groups survived, because the ones who made it had a tactic to make it out. And the Aeldari specifically, their tactic largely was to make it out on craft worlds. these huge continent or planet-sized, psychically resonant ships that are manifested with their energy and can be shaped to their will, that they live on in a commensalistic relationship to keep each other alive. Taking their fallen souls of their dead and putting them in these gems that then are laid to rest in these ships, so that their souls can live in this beautiful, harmonious matrix rather than being devoured by the chaos god Slanesh, who is always after them. And really, the Craftworld story now centers around just trying to survive.
Trying to protect those last bastions holding their race.
Yeah, it is an apocalypse scenario for them. It's one thing for another faction to get attacked and have to, like, scuttle a ship. You hit the you hit the boarding pods, you eject, and, you make planetfall, you get another ship, whatever. But for them, it's not the case. It's the souls of their entire species in this ship. It's resident. They speak to it. So it's a bigger deal. And they try to do this by looking into the future deeply through these incredible paths and magic that they have, and interceding on problems early, which is how we see them enter the setting a lot of the time.
Yes, which sometimes works and sometimes backfires.
Well, on the tabletop, it goes pretty well.
It does.
Their faction rule is all about it.
Yeah, so their army rule is called Strands of Fate, and similar to the Sisters of Battle mechanic, you're going to just roll 12 dice at the beginning of the game, and you can choose to re-roll that, but every time you do, you take a die away. But whatever those dice roll up on, you put them all off to the side, and you can substitute those dice for other dice.
Yes.
They're right here. There's a list.
Yeah.
I suggest you read all of this. This is very important to the army. Like, this is the core mechanic that takes you from being a bunch of, like, elite sort of units to being able to punch way above your weight class and stay consistent when you need to be.
Yeah, so for example, let's say you're shooting a big devastating cannon and it's D6 plus 3 damage. You need at least a 6. If you have a 6 in your little pool, instead of rolling, you can say, I'm using my 6. Boom. There you go. You maxed out your damage, 9 damage.
Yes.
That's how it works. And there are ways you could kind of play with that pool. We'll talk about them. And then secondarily, also increasing their sort of their consistency on the tabletop, all attached to their idea of looking into the future, is unparalleled foresight. This one is much simpler. Every time an Aeldari unit from your army is selected to shoot or fight, you can reroll 1 hit roll and reroll 1 wound roll. Not reroll ones, just pick 1 hit roll and pick 1 wound roll.
That's very good.
Really increases your consistency across the board.
It also motivates you to take, like, MSU squads, which for those of you who are newer, that's multiple single units. So you want to take, like, the smallest squad size possible, so you can utilize that ability more and more, which fits in the narrative of being like a smaller force that's like scrapping by.
Yeah, they don't have a whole lot of Eldar to throw at it, so you're not going to see a lot of teeming hordes of them on the table.
Right.
But I think sort of the things you're going to think of with Eldar a lot is stuff that isn't super sturdy, but is very consistent on what it does. And if you go through and you look through the data sheets, you will find a lot of that. But we're not going to cover all of them because they have a much deeper bench than I remembered.
Yeah, they have a very large amount of data sheets to choose from. There's a lot of reasons for that. You might have seen Harlequins before in a previous edition. They've been folded into this. You might have seen Ynnari in a previous edition. They've been folded into this as well. And last edition, they got a couple of new models. So, like, the bench has gotten quite large. This is one of the biggest Xenos, like, factions. And there's a lot of really good stuff in here. And there's too much to pick. Like, you're going to see many lists come out of Eldar.
We each tried to pick 1 apiece and came to the table with 4 apiece.
All different, too. Like, they were all different choices.
We had no overlap between the two of us. So there's a lot of good here. But we did, we holler brawled at a Speedway parking lot about it. And we have come to 2. And
I made you buy me a pack of Marlboro Reds and a zero sugar Monster Energy drink.
As is the price of the ritual. But I think, like, if we're going to talk about the faction, instead of picking some of, like, the big, cool, stompy stuff, even though I love the idea of Ghost Knights, we should pick the thing that's most representative, which I think John is right, is Guardian Defenders. John, tell me about them.
Yeah, so, like, Guardian Defenders wasn't my first pick. There's a bunch of other really, 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 really cool stuff out there. But I think to explain what this faction does at the core is I should pick the core troop you're going to take in every list.
Yeah. It's going to be hard to leave home without one of these.
Yeah, like there's a lot of spicy stuff in Eldar, but you're always going to take these. The biggest reason for that is their movement 7, which is higher than everyone else's movement of 6. Very good. That 1 inch comes in handy. But they're a little weaker at T3. Does mean it's a lot easier to wound them. They get wounded by like las guns on 4s and bolters on 3s.
Yeah.
It's not great. A 4-up save, right? You're probably thinking, oh, well, you're not really selling me on these. Well, what is going to sell you is the ability, Defenders of Fate, which is at the end of your command phase, if they are on an objective, you roll a d6 and you add that to your Fate dice pool. You know that Strands of Fate thing we were talking about? Yeah, if you've got 3 guys on 3 objectives, you're going to roll 3 dice and add that to your pool that you can keep using. So they're going to be your generated, like your generator for those Fate dice.
Oh.
Yeah. And they can take a heavy weapon in like a Star Cannon or a Bright Lance or any of those other things, and that will allow you to do a little bit of plink damage where you need to, but don't be expecting to heavily rely on these guys for damage against anything beyond other basic infantry.
Yeah, I think they trade fairly well with other, like, guardsman type things. And even maybe some basic Space Marines, they can whittle them down a little, but anything else, it's just not their job. But also what makes them really flexible is that they could take just an incredible Rolodex of heroes in this unit as a sort of add-on option that can give all sorts of rules. But the one I think is most representative and can go in this unit is the Farseer. If you have pictured Eldar in your head, you are probably picturing a Farseer. It is the unit. It is one of the mystics who has walked the path of the seer and is all about seeing and changing the future. And boy howdy, they're doing a great job. Similarly, if you look at the stat line up here, it's a lot like the base troops. T3, movement 7, you know, they're not super, super tough. That's going to be an Eldar trait. It's one of the things you just got to live with in the army. And they got a damage 3 weapon, but it doesn't hit. It's not like super, super reliable. So that's not why you take them. But why you take them is 1, they got that Eldritch Blast over there that hits fairly well as a Shuriken Pistol and a Singing Spear. That's quite a few shots. But the ability section, y'all. The ability section. Branching Fates. Once per turn, when you use a fate dice to substitute for a roll made for a model within 12 inches of this Farseer, you can turn that dice into a 6. So, from your fate pool, let's say one of your dudes is making a damage roll, and you can take one of your poopy dice, like, let's say you had a 1 in there, you don't want a 1, what are you going to do with a 1? Now, his ability once per turn, boom, that's a 6. Put that in for damage. That's so good. That's incredible.
It's extremely good.
And I think even if his War Scroll stopped here, I would still take him. But then further, he has Fortune, which is a psychic ability that goes off on a 2-up, so it's quite reliable. And you can select 1 friendly Eldar unit within 12. And then enemies that attack them for the next turn, subtract 1 from the wound roll. Which, on a faction like Eldar, that are really, really paper, and can die to a stiff breeze, that's even more valuable than it would be in any other force, which is a very good buff. The shenanigans that he could pull off on a little basic foot troop are just wonderful. And it's indicative of some of the other heroes that could do similar shenanigans.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good heroes in here, but I think that when you're first starting the faction, or if you're just like you're unsure or you just have the points to spend, Farseer is like the pick He is the pick that you're probably going to pick most of the time.
He's
not core to a strategy, but he's core to like the faction.
Yeah, you might take him on foot. You might put him on like a flying hover bike. But either way, you're taking a Farseer, I suspect. And I think it leads us sort of towards the end of Eldar. If you are into Eldar, there's a huge Rolodex of data sheets to look through. And I hope I have pitched it to you. There's so much lore, and there are sub-factions in here now that I didn't even mention with their own lore. You could dive into it for days if you're a lore person.
Yeah, it's a very wide faction.
I'm just now learning about Eldar deeply, and there's so much. I am shocked at how much I did not know after years of playing against them. But if you're into them and sort of interests you, we wanted to give you a tip for each of us so that we could give you a leg up on learning this faction. It's always hard to learn a new faction or get into a game you haven't played before, maybe if you're a new player, but especially this one. So we want to give you a tangible piece of advice to take on your way to maybe ease that journey. John, what would be your one go-to piece of advice?
My biggest tip, and they're kind of two tips combined, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm using a fate dice. So, like...
Well, I guess I got to allow it.
Yeah, you have to bring transports, right? Like, yes, you could just bring Guardian Defenders on foot. Yes, they have a 7-inch move, and that's really good. You need them to get to objectives safely and hold on to those objectives for multiple turns. Put them in a Wave Serpent or like a Falcon. Put them up the table. Have a plan for delivering them to the no man's land and then keeping them safe there. Right? And that kind of brings me to my other tip, which is build a core like force of like, these are the things that I need to be able to play the game. Mm-hmm. And then leave a lot of open points for tools, and then pick the tools that fit what you want to be doing in the game. Don't try to do everything. Pick a couple of things and do those, because there's a ton of tools in this army.
This is a colossal toolbox army.
Yeah, like everywhere I looked, there was a different thing I could do. Different like, do you want to kill characters? You've got like 17 options for like.
It's one of the huge, like, roll-around snap-on carts. Like, it's just drawers upon drawers of tools.
And the balancing factor is you can't take all of it. Like, you can take, like, a couple. They add up really quick. So, choose wisely.
Yeah, and I think that kind of falls into my tip. I think the one thing I would tell you is that a lot of the factions we have talked about, things like Death Guard, things like World Eaters, things like a lot of Space Marines, you can just sort of walk forward, and you're going to get hit some, but you're going to be alright. You'll walk through it. You'll take some casualties on the way in, but like you're still going to get to where you're trying to go. With Eldar, that is not the case. So like my big tip here is play safe. Until you are ready to commit, play safe. If you walk these things up the board too early, they will go in the blink of an eye. Even bolters will just turn them to dust. So you really got to play cagey and get the fights where you want them, rather than vice versa. And I think if you could do all of that, you're probably off to a good start, but you're still going to be learning this force for years. So, prepare for the path of the Eldar player.
Yeah.
It's a long one. And if you are someone who isn't necessarily super sold on tragic, haughty space elves looking into the future, maybe there's another type of faction you're into, and by the time you watch this, hopefully it's up on the channel. And if you are into Eldar, but you got questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. This is a complicated faction with a lot of intricate options. Do not feel bad about asking about it.
Yes, and we either have played against Eldar, or we know someone who plays Eldar currently. So,
and John's trying to convince me to play Eldar. We'll see how it goes.
Joe would love it.
I'm a good dwarf. We're gonna have to fight that Speedway parking lot again.
You like Sylvaneth, you'll like Eldar.
That's a grudge. And I forgot where we are in the spiel. You did this to me. Now I can't see the future.
You're signing off. Let everyone know how much you appreciate them watching our video.
We do. We greatly appreciate it. And please, if there's anything else you're looking for, check the channel. It'll be up. For now, that's been all of our opinions. Bonafide, Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all in the next one. Yeah, Joe, play Eldar, Path of the Seer. Can't even see where we're at in the show.